Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel BethChatsBooks. Now today is going to be the vlog of the semi-finals round for the Booktube prize. So I am judging translated fiction Group B, and I have not done an announcement video for this because it is now the 11th of June and I am slowly, very slowly making my way through this translated fiction group. I have managed to read one of the books and I'm listening to another on audio. I have bought from Amazon, from the Kindle app, 2 other ebooks, and I've reserved 2 other books from the library. One of them has come in, so I am going this afternoon to the library to go and collect that. But I'm just going to quickly tell you the 6 books that I'm judging for this round. So the first one is My Heart, and that is by Semestin Merminovic and translated by Celia Hawksworth. I'm sorry if I'm looking down, I've just got everything on a notebook because they're quite complicated to pronounce, the translated fiction authors. So sorry, but I'll insert pictures. Then the next one is The Survivors, and this is written by Alex Schulman and translated by Rachel Wilson Broyles. The next one is Heaven, and that is written by Mieko Kawakami and translated by David Boyle and Sam Brett. The next one after that is Brickmakers, and this is written by Selva Almada and translated by Annie McDermott. Then I am also reading The Phone Booth at the Edge of the World, and that is written by Laura Imau Messina and translated by Lucy Rand. And then the final one is Disquiet, which is written by Zulufu Livanelli and translated by Brendan Freely. Anyway, that's my attempt at pronouncing their names. The only book that I have finished so far is Heaven. And I found it quite hard to articulate my thoughts on Heaven. It's a very short book. I managed to take it out as an ebook from the library, and I read it within 1 or 2 days. It is set in Japan, and it follows a young boy who strikes up a friendship with a young girl at school. What they both have predominantly in common is that they've both been bullied at the school that they attend, and the bullying is getting quite bad. And they strike up this unlikely friendship that also is quite complicated. They're both very damaged characters, and that is kind of expressed in the book with their interactions being odd sometimes. The bullying is very, very difficult to read about in this book. I found it very haunting. And very, very distressing. Some of the things that they make the boy do, things like eating chalk and stripping naked and locking him in cupboards, was just very horrific to read about. I personally find reading or learning about or watching on television things within the realm of bullying, particularly in the school environment, very painful to watch. I have never been bullied at school. That's not my story, but I find it really heartbreaking that some people have disconnected from school because of bullying, when I think it's a really important space for kids, and kids can be particularly cruel. So seeing those kind of things play out has always made me feel very uncomfortable. And it's also made me feel very sad because I know as a young person I wouldn't have had the wherewithal or felt equipped enough to deal with that situation. I'm just very lucky that I didn't. So when I read and I see things like that, I just find it very distressing. But that's in essence kind of the core of the book. I know it's quite philosophical and poetic, and it moved me a lot, but it didn't do anything extra for me. And obviously very in line with kind of Japanese fiction, it's not necessarily plot driven, it's kind of amusing on characters and philosophical questions around bullying and power dynamics. That was interesting, but it was kind of one note, this particular book, so I wasn't able to create my own interpretation of the characters, because they kind of felt one-dimensional, and I wasn't able to interact with the story as such. It just felt like I was told a story that has like kind of disconnected tone that I think a little bit of Japanese fiction does, that tends to be more philosophical than plot and reality driven, which a lot of people love. I don't dislike, I just don't love. So I've just given it 3 out of 5 stars, because there's not a lot of tangible and feelings and interpretations that I can glean from this book. So I don't actually have that much to say on it, really. And then I'm listening to the audio book that I also took out of the library of The Phone Booth at the Edge of the World. I think it's kind of a semi-true story of the area of Japan in the aftermath of the tsunami, after the 2011 tsunami, and it talks about this phone booth. I don't know anything more about it, so obviously once I've finished listening to it, I will let you know. This is quite a short audiobook. It's only about 5 hours 30 or 40 minutes, which is quite short for an audiobook, because I've taken a few out that have been 15 plus. I think Jonathan Franzen's Crossroads was mega. I think it was about 24 hours. So this is quite short, so I should get through this quite quickly. And then I'm going to collect from the library. The Survivors has come in, and I also have My Heart and Disquiet on ebook, so I can read them while I wait for Brickmakers to come in. But I will catch up with you guys in the next clip, so I'll see you then. Hello everyone, so this is just another check-in for this vlog. So I have managed to read the next 3 books, so I'm just going to condense my reviews in this clip of the next 3 books that I read. So the first one I want to talk about is The Phone Booth at the Edge of the World by Laura Imai Mazina. And I read this after Heaven, and this is also another Japanese book. So this is set in Japan. It's predominantly set in Tokyo after the 2011 tsunami, and it follows the character of Yui, and she ends up finding out that in another part of Japan, it's quite a long car journey away, because it mentions a lot in the book about the lengthy journey and snacks that they buy over the course of travelling the journey. I think it's about 6 or 7 hours, a lengthy car journey anyway, between Tokyo and this place. But she finds out in this place in Japan, I can't remember off the top of my head, that there is a phone booth that's been erected by a local man who lives there, and he has created it. It's a phone booth that doesn't actually connect the phone to anywhere, but it's where a lot of people who've lost loved ones, particularly people who lost people from the tsunami disaster, can kind of talk to their loved ones. So they won't get a response, but they can obviously talk into the phone box, and it's been helping people with grief. This is loosely based on a true place in Japan that exists, and the author did visit that place and the people who look after that phone booth, and kind of talk to them about the people that come to the phone booth and how they deal with grief and the conversations that they have with them and things like that. So that really helped. And then when Yui gets there, she ends up kind of creating a relationship with a man called Takeshi, and they strike up an unlikely friendship through the reality of them both having lost somebody. So Takeshi lost his wife through illness, and Yui lost her mother and her daughter to the tsunami disaster. And Takeshi has a daughter, and they kind of create a family unit over the span of the book. Now, I really liked the idea of the phone booth, and I thought that was a really strong part of the book. But then the second half, when it kind of looks at Yui and Takeshi's relationship and the daughter, it kind of starts to lose a plot. And I know that Japanese writing in particular, after just reading Heaven and then this book, is kind of philosophical in nature, and this is beautiful writing, and it reflects a lot on grief and loss, what family means, and losing somebody, and this idea of the phone booth being metaphorical of trying to make peace with loss and connect to the dead and things like that. I think that was really, really interesting, but I found that this was kind of plotless in some ways, a bit like Heaven, and for a lot of people that's going to be really intriguing, but for me, I didn't really connect to this book. It felt disjointed and very philosophical, and I think it's very sad. It muses on grief and loss and all those painful emotions, and I wasn't in the mood for beautiful, lyrical, philosophical writing at the time that I read this book, so I felt disconnected from it. I think some bits in it were really great. There's quite a lot of small little chapters in between bigger chapters that just has things like the list of snacks that were bought at the shop before they travelled from Tokyo to the place where the phone booth is, Belgravia I think it's called, or Belgravia, something like that, or the little girl's favourite books or TV that she used to listen to with her mum, or her favourite memories with her mum before she died. Those little snippets were really fun. I listened to this on audiobook and the audio narration was beautiful. The lady's voice was really rhythmic and really nice to listen to. But overall, it wasn't for me at the time that I read it, so I've decided to give it 3 out of 5 stars, the same as Heaven. I think I will just put it above Heaven at the moment because I think that this book will appeal to so many more people, and I found moments where I was connecting with it. I did find it very pretty, the language was gorgeous, and there was more character development in here than Heaven, but I just think I read it at the wrong time to fully appreciate it. And then the next one I read was Disquiet by Zulfu Livaneli. I'm sorry, I've just got my notebook down here because I read these 3 books in really quick succession. So I just wanted to make sure that I'm pronouncing the right names and the plots as accurately and condensed as possible. So this follows Ibrahim, who is a journalist in Istanbul, and his school friend Hussein is killed. And so he moves temporarily. He's a journalist, so he's going to try and cover the story as well, I think, a little bit. He goes from Istanbul to Mesopotamia to attend the funeral. And then as he does, he speaks to his schoolhood friends who talk about the fact that Hussein had fallen in love with a woman that he had helped. She was a Syrian refugee who he was looking after in the camps because he had a medical background, called Melikanaz, and she was a refugee. She had a blind baby, and she is part of the Yazidi religion, and Hussein was a Muslim. He was already engaged at the time, but he falls in love with her, and this is really frowned upon in his community because Muslims believe Yazidis are Satan worshippers and that they're bad, and it's forbidden for Muslims and Yazidis to marry. But he says he wants to marry her, he wants to raise this child, and he wants to run away with her. His family are not very happy about this, and then he gets attacked by the local community who have found out that he started this relationship with this woman, and they don't like it. So then he ends up fleeing to Germany, where his brother is living, to try and seek refuge because he's realised his community are extricating him essentially for this relationship. And then when he's in Germany, through no fault of his own, a neo-Nazi alt-right group find him and attack him and beat him to death because he is a Muslim, and in this particular far-right group want to eradicate all Muslims from Germany. So Ibrahim hears this story from a friend, and he starts to compile this story for his paper, and then he goes and attends the Syrian refugee camps and speaks to women there and hears their story of abduction and rape and child marriage and slavery, and then trying to find freedom. and it starts this kind of philosophical musing for the main character on identity, religion, war, slavery, the issues in Syria, humanity, how we care for people, and the tragedy encompassed in all of this. So while he's reflecting on Hussein's death, he becomes quite obsessed with this woman who Hussein fell in love with, and he speaks to people who knew her. So he finds a lady who was also a refugee who escaped to the refugee camps with her and heard about their experiences. He tries to track down the blind child, and he kind of becomes obsessed with her, but she's more a metaphor for this kind of human tragedy that is kind of happening with the Syrian refugee crisis, and the war in Syria, and it reflects on ISIS and the brutality there, and violence in the name of religion, and she becomes a metaphor kind of for all these people that have been mistreated, and Hussein as well, and these tragedies and cruelties that happen. So it's a really interesting look at how we treat immigrants, how we treat refugees, how we look at war zones, and trying to really seek the humanity in that as well. Particularly one element I found really striking in this book was when he speaks to the lady's friend who escaped with her, and how he keeps mentioning that she looks completely detached when she's talking about the most horrific things that have happened to her and to her own sister who ended up dying, and to her own friend who she escaped with. So I think it really reflects those topics of, he kind of felt like more of a Westerner looking at an Eastern experience, because it talks a lot about the Eastern and Western identity in this novel. And he felt shock that she had this detached way of describing something traumatic. So it also looks at the psychology of trauma as well, and how people have a level of detachment with such high trauma and things like PTSD, and trying to move forward when something that horrific has happened in your life. So I thought this was very profound, and it is super quick as well. So when it starts to lean into that musing type of philosophical style, it doesn't last for long. So if you don't mind being in that space for a short period of time, because it kind of doesn't have a concrete plot either, but I found it had a lot of tangible moments. We were seeing the character move through stories that kept me gripped, and because it was quite short as well, I found it compelling and really interesting. So I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. I don't think it was quite strong enough to be a 4-star, but I did really enjoy this, and I think I surprisingly connected with this better than The Phone Booth at the Edge of the World. Similar poignancy, I would say, but I found I connected with Disquiet a little bit better. And then the last book that I want to talk about is My Heart by Semizdin Medinovic, and this is about a Bosnian gentleman who lives in America, and this is set in kind of 2017-16. The book is cut into 3 main sections. The first one is the story of himself, so it starts with him having a heart attack and being taken into hospital, and him reflecting on his own fragility and his own mortality, and that's quite a short section. The second section focuses on a letter that he writes to his son, and he kind of muses on travelling around America and his identity, and he throws in a little bit of his history about the Bosnian War and his own identity in that middle section. And then the final section is about his wife, who she suffers a stroke and it affects her memory, and him kind of becoming a carer for her, and him again reflecting on similar topics at the beginning about the fragility of life and about memory and connection. And also it muses a bit on their relationship, because he's reflecting a lot on her and his love and devotion for her. So I found the middle section the least interesting, because I think it strayed into similar themes in the other books that I didn't like so much, where it was kind of amusing on a lot of other different things. Because a lot of the books have similar topics, similar themes. This musing on war and travelling and identity got a little bit tiresome for me, which is unfortunate because that's just how I'm feeling a bit burnt out by that repetition, and that's not a fault of the book. But my favourite sections were the first and the last section, particularly the first section, because this book is semi-autobiographical about the actual author's experience of his health and his life and his experiences. And I really found the first section packed a punch. It was quite quick and I probably would have liked a bit more of it. But he was reflecting on this kind of out-of-body experience he had when the ambulance came, and how he was kind of conscious that he was like aware that he was dying, and yet he was saved through medical miracles and the medical profession. But he talked about this out-of-body experience that I think was fascinating, because for a lot of people, if they are near death, they don't really come back from the brink of death and are able to accurately talk about it. But he had this way where he said, you know, his heart actually stopped, but he had memories of lying on the floor and the ambulance coming to him, and then going into the hospital and actually having the operation occur, and being conscious of this whole experience. So he almost is a narrator of his death and then his revival, which I found really interesting. I thought the last section that focused on his wife and her illness was really interesting, and really profound as well, because it almost felt like that section had a loss of control. In the first section, it was still quite controlled how he was telling the reader about his experience, but in the last section, he has this sense of a loss of control, like losing her. She's the pillar, she's the stability for him, and her being ill and him having to take on the carer's role, and him watching her struggle with her memory was way more painful for him than comprehending his own illness. And that was quite beautiful. There's a lot of devotion and love in that last section, and he reflects a lot on his son as well, and they talk about the son. So this one's a hard one to judge because I've recently just read it, and I know a lot of people really loved this one. So I think I'm going to give it 3.5 because I think upon reflection I'll realise that I respected and enjoyed certain bits of it. I definitely connected with it more than Phone Booth at the Edge of the World, but I actually think, from talking to you guys now about my thoughts, that I've obviously had the most connection with Disquiet. So I think I will put it at 3.5 because I think it was really well written, and the first and last section I loved. The middle section I think could have been condensed a lot more. He was talking about travelling around America and with his son and different bits, and I couldn't connect to that section. So I'll give it 3.5 out of 5 stars because I did enjoy it. But I'm going to put Disquiet at number 1, then My Heart, then Phone Booth at the Edge of the World, and then Heaven at the bottom at the moment. I still have The Survivors to read and Brickmakers. Just looked at it, it was down there on the floor. So I will talk about those two in the final clip and then give you my final rankings. So I will speak to you guys then. Bye for now. Hello everyone, so this is the final clip for the Booktube Prize Translated Fiction round that I am judging. And I have now finished the last 2 books, which is the Brickmakers, and I've literally just finished the Survivors as well, so I'm going to review these now for you. So these two had quite a similar reading experience because they both play around with the structure of the 2 novels. The chronology is mixed in both, and they are telling male identity stories. So in some ways they were quite similar, and I gave them a very similar rating, and I've just been sitting for 10 minutes to decide what I want to do with these 2. So I think I will reveal that at the end, but I'm just going to start talking about Brickmakers and then the Survivors. So Brickmakers is about 2 boys in Argentina, Pajaro and Marciano, and it starts at the end of their story really. So it starts at the end where they have had a fight, they have both stabbed each other, and they're reflecting on their lives while they are essentially dying at an abandoned amusement park, which they've started earlier in the novel. They were hanging out there with the friends, and then we're kind of starting the novel at the end where they're essentially waiting to die, which isn't a spoiler because we're kind of aware of that. So they're reflecting on their lives. They're reflecting on their relationships with their dads. Both of their dads had a bit of a rivalry, and the sons kind of almost have created a revenge plot. It kind of has that loose Hamlet retelling about it. And what I found really interesting as I read this book is these two characters and their relationship to one another is the sole focus of this novel. And for Pajaro, he has a LGBT storyline with Marciano's brother Angel, and I thought it was a really interesting angle that relationship wasn't really explored. This could have been framed as a Romeo and Juliet almost style retelling because of the father's hatred for one another and the two families' issues and that romantic element, but it chose to go with a Hamlet retelling aspect, which I found really interesting because these two boys, their friendship when they were younger, and how that turned to a kind of slow burn hatred of each other like their fathers, and history repeating itself and the tragic nature of that and all of their potential and the futile and sad way that the kind of book ends. And we already know at the beginning how it's going to end, and I thought it was really playful how it played with the structure. So you're kind of going backwards in time, and it's also throwing in chronology from the past, the far past when their fathers were younger, and then the more recent past, as they go from their childhood through to adulthood through to this main event. The chapters were really short and incredibly compelling, and I found it kind of gave little snippets of everybody's character development in really fun bite-sized ways. So I found that the sons and the fathers were as complex as each other. We get a little bit of understanding of the wives, and we kind of are able to root these characters in their culture, in the circumstances, and find out more about their personalities. So when I first read this, I expected that this would be a little bit dull, but the character development is so strong, particularly of the sons and the fathers. I found I raced through this. I was really fascinated, and obviously the ending is kind of apparent at the beginning, but that's not really the point of the novel, or almost it's the point when you finish it to kind of have that sympathy, what a waste, and how they were kind of pushed by circumstances and culture and their fathers into an unchangeable situation, an irrevocable, irreversible decision. So yeah, it's really hard to kind of talk about this one, but I really loved it. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I genuinely thought that this would be my number 1 pick. But I have literally just finished The Survivors, and the first half of The Survivors I was pretty confident that I think it was going to be a 4-star, so I knew it was going to go above Disquiet and bump itself up the list, but I wasn't really sure if it was going to go in number 1 place. But the last kind of 30-40 pages of this book really ramped it up, and I felt like it really got a shock factor out of me, and I was quite surprised, and I didn't actually anticipate the direction it went in. The last 30-40 pages, it kind of does almost a Life of Pi trick on you. So I've also given this 4 out of 5 stars, but I think this is going at number 1. So let me actually talk about it for you guys. So this follows 3 brothers in Sweden, Pierre, Nils and Benjamin, and we kind of follow Benjamin, who's the middle son's story, and the first half of the book is a lot of preempting and a lot of anticipation building for the fact that there's a lot of trauma that the boys have gone through in regards to their parents and their family life when they were younger that's really impacted their adult lives. So this plays around with chronology as well a lot. So this kind of starts at the end as well, where their mother is dead and she's the last relative, the last parent, and the father had already died some years earlier. And so they're collecting her urn because she's asked that her ashes be spread at the holiday cottage that they used to go to when the boys were little. So they go back, and as they go back to the location, they also have to confront the past and some of the traumas of the past. And so the first half is a little bit of a slow build. You're kind of waiting for the reveals, and then 2 or 3 reveals kind of get given that make more sense to the ending. It takes you on that journey, and I didn't believe in the last 30 or 40 pages it could take me to where it did, so I found that quite impressive. It's also quite playful. Like every other chapter, it goes back in time in a strange way, so it's like it does the trajectory of their journey from collecting the urn and going to the house and having an emotional moment. So it goes all the way from them at the house, and then the next few chapters will start when they've gone to collect the urn but end at the bit where they were at the house. It's really hard to describe, but it kind of runs on from one another, odd chapters for the chronology, but the chronology is going backwards in time, not forwards in time. So I thought that was really playful and fun. This is quite a heartbreaking book, and it does do that false sense of security where I almost thought some of this book was a bit slow at the beginning, so that it can give you that real gut punch at the end. And the parents, I know a lot of people feel a lot of empathy for the parents. I've been looking at some of the reviews, but I feel like Benjamin is quite a heartbreaking character because as the middle child, and I'm a middle child, but thankfully I don't feel quite as anxious as Benjamin does to keep a family unit together and to keep everyone happy. He's obsessed with trying to make everyone happy, and he's really perceptive emotionally to the moods of his parents. I do think middle children are quite perceptive to emotions around them, but anyway. It's quite heartbreaking for him because he's replaying some memories, and he seems to have an acute memory of some of the things that his parents did that his brothers have seemed to block out. But he's very sensitive to their criticism, to their drinking. He's desperate for some affection and love from them, and he can never quite get it. And a lot of that is answered at the end. It makes a lot more sense why he's craving that affection so much in the context of things that have happened. So you kind of really wanted to console him, because even as an adult he wasn't sure why he has these anxieties, and he's stuck in the past a lot more than his brothers. He's unresolved, and we slowly get an inkling of the other brothers, what they've had to deal with, and he mentions how close they were as children and how far apart they are as adults, and that's the effect of some of the things that have happened. So this, I realised when I finished this, about half an hour ago, 40 minutes ago, that there was so much more to unpack with this than Brickmakers, about the individual boys. I fell in love with the sons in Brickmakers and the sons in this novel, and in some ways the ending of Brickmakers is as tragic, if not potentially more tragic, because it's loss of life. It's a futile fight that you know at the beginning. But this allowed the emotional magnitude and the poignancy to develop that I think Brickmakers didn't. And I don't know whether that's a translation thing, because I was emotionally connected to both, so I think the translation was very well done. And maybe it's just a case of, because this is the last one I've read, this is the freshest in my mind. But I highly recommend both of these novels. I really enjoyed them. I'm really connected to them, and I'm really happy that I've read these two. So overall, I didn't have a bad bunch of translated fiction at all. I think I had a really good bunch. I'm kind of disappointed, like with the phone booth at the edge of the world, that I didn't connect with it more, because I think it had a really important thing to say about the 2011 tsunami and about grief, and a lot of these books do have the theme of grief. I don't know whether that's a universal theme that, translated fiction can kind of pass that message on universally and interculturally and globally. but those were definitely big prominent themes in most of the translated fiction that I read. Really enjoyed them. There was no such thing as a bad book in this category, so I'm really happy that I've read them and that I've read some translated fiction this year, because I always strive to read translated fiction every year. So I'm really glad this category is here, and I'm really glad I've read these, because I would never have picked these up on my own, and some of them were a real pleasure to read. So very happy. So I'm going to give you my final rankings and end this video so that this vlog is not ridiculously long for you guys. So in 6th place is Heaven, in 5th place is The Phone Booth at the Edge of the World, in 4th place is My Heart, in 3rd place is Disquiet, in 2nd place is Brickmakers, and in 1st place is The Survivors. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully I'll be able to do the final round, which should be the finals, the very next round, because I think all judges are allowed to participate in that. So I will be back with a vlog for that, hopefully. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be back with a video very soon. Bye now.